So one question I want to ask you is, there's a lot of changes in industry, right? The world of work is transforming. One question I want: what is the role of a project manager in the future?
It's an interesting question. And in a lot of my classes, I get this this debate between project manager and scrum master, and it's usually a project manager versus a scrum master debate. But I kind of look at it a little differently. I think that contrary to what popular belief might be, if you're a traditionally certified project manager, you are actually at a much more advantageous position than so many other people out there, because you have quantitatively a lot more skills than anybody else out there. Because if you think about the body of work of a project manager in the traditional world, it used to be a lot of monitoring and control and directing and leading, things like that, which for the most part now has been divvied up across different roles in Scrum. And you talk about servant leadership, it's a Scrum Master. You talk about product management, it's the product owner. You talk about technical work or development work, it's the dev team. So as a project manager, I think that you just have to pick a lane. You either become a subject matter expert and you go down the road of product ownership, or you go down the road of true leadership, which is servant leadership. You can be a Scrum Master, a senior Scrum Master, coaches, trainers, agile executives, or you can go down the road of a technical SME. You can become a developer, a senior developer, an architect. I mean, it just depends on what your organization is doing. But I think that as a project manager, you are one of the few people who can really pick a lane and decide how you want to further your journey in that career. So there's really no need for things to be one versus the other. I think they can coexist. I think it's just a question of tweaking the mindset and the perspective of how you approach this work.
Sure. Okay. How many project managers do we have here, or different managers? Okay. PMP certified? Okay. That's great. Okay. I know. I think, and there's a big, because we also do consulting and other side of the business. We're seeing a lot of project managers. Either basically they're transitioning, so project managers have been successfully transitioning to transforming to agile. They've been very successful, and project managers who are traditional, they're still struggling, right? It's really a big change for them as well. Right?
Yeah, I think it's a structural change. It's a change in the body of work. Right? There's a lot that goes into it.
Okay, right. Okay, so another question that I have is the role of a business analyst. Okay, so that's again, I think this year is going to have a very big impact for that as well, because we're seeing the BA job, the role of business analyst, been changing as well. In Agile, what how BA?
Yeah, so speaking from a Scrum perspective, a business analyst is, say, another developer on the dev team. Right? They do the analyst side of things. But if you were to add on a few other things from an Agile perspective, and you're not just doing Scrum, if you're doing a broader version of Agile, then a business analyst is somebody who will work closely with the product owner, because the business analyst has the availability, they are the dedicated member of the team, they have the knowledge, they know more about the product. They might not have decision-making authority, because that's something that the product owner decides, the audit of the product backlog and the prioritization and all those things. But the business analyst focuses on working with the product owner, working with the rest of the development team to make sure that there is a smooth flow of intent from a business standpoint to a system or a technical standpoint. So I think that a role of a business analyst is very important. I think that the role of a business analyst can also broaden up and not just focusing on analysis, but also focusing on testing, on verification, on how do you go about verifying solutions, how do you go about doing gap analysis of new product ideas and things like that. So I think that the role is still a development team role, but it has a broader purview than it used to in the traditional world now, I'd say.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions from the
Yeah, that's the same question about architectural roles in the Scrum environment. Right?
Yeah.
So they, in a traditional development, project management, you have like an architect, BA kind of thing. Where do they fit in the Scrum environment?
I think yeah, so that's a good question too. I think in general, as a thumb rule, if you need a skill or a specific set of skills or a specific talent for delivering a certain product, then you should try and build that skill within the Scrum team. If that means having architecture, having designers, having programmers, having testers, the idea is to have a self-contained unit. So think of a startup company. In the startup company, you have a group of people who figure out within each other what the right mix of skills are. Now, everybody might not be able to do everybody's job. That's all right, as long as we have the right mix of skills. So you can have your own individual domain area of expertise, I can have my own domain area of expertise. But I know enough about the complementing skill that my role in this team can lend itself well to some sort of a cross-functional skill and cross-functional behavior. And similarly, the same thing goes with, say, your role. So architecture, if it's required, or architecture-specific work is required in the sprint, you should try and do that as part of the Scrum team. So there probably wouldn't be a dedicated architect, or like we used to define a dedicated architect, but there will be somebody with the architecture skill who can also do something else, which is a complementing skill. So I see them as pretty much part of the development team, as you would need them.
About the tester, like, do we really need in like Scrum, or is it like developing for, like, we have like a couple of developers, like one developer will be testing the other's code, or do you think like separate, do we have like separate person who thinks from the testing perspective, from that background is a must, or we don't need it? How is the future going to be about a tester in the QA side?
That's a good question. That's a pretty loaded question. Let me see if I can answer that efficiently. I'd say that you're always going to have some amount of segmentation of skills. That's just the way I've found human nature to work. But only having segmented skills or only having segmented behavior is also not a solution. So I think the truth is somewhere in between. So it's all right for you to specialize in testing, but if that's all you do, then that's probably not going to be okay in the long term when you think of team-based behavior. So as long as you can pick up a complementing skill, and as long as you can support the team with that complementing skill, I think that should be all right. I mean, I still am a programmer at heart. Whenever I work with a few of my friends from college, if we're writing a certain software app or something, I still program. But I can also test somebody else's code. If I know enough of C# programming, I can run the simulation, I can feed data in, and I can test somebody else's code. Now, I won't test my own code because I'm biased towards it, probably. But I can test somebody else's. So if you're a tester at heart and that's what you specialize in and that's your passion, then it's okay to be that, because that's where your true skill is, and you should always play to your strength. But through years of verifying solutions, you will also gain enough experience and mindset to understand how users think and what generally drives user behavior, which means you're now getting into a little bit of analysis also. So then should I call you a business analyst? I don't know, it depends. Right? So it's okay to have a specified domain area as long as you can back it up with a little bit of complementing skill. So the idea should always be to broaden up your mindset a little bit. Just like from a Scrum Master's perspective. From a Scrum Master's perspective, you're also the coach for the team. You don't need a dedicated agile coach. A Scrum Master can also do coaching. It just depends on what the need of the hour is. Sometimes you have to be an agony aunt for the team. Sometimes you just have to be a listener. Okay, well, go ahead and bend on me. I'll listen. I'm like a shock absorber. Right? So it depends what the role is going to be. I think there's always going to be a need for a certain amount of speciality. But working in complex product development, just being dedicated to the one specialty might not be a solution. You might have to think outside the box a little bit too. I don't know if that answers your question or if there's more to that.
You mentioned that that Scrum is used all over the world in technical and non-technical fields as well. Can you give an example of non-technical field where Scrum is in?
Yeah, so a couple of examples that stand out to me is a friend of mine who has a company by the name Claro Energy. This company builds solar-powered water pumping solutions. They pretty much follow an iterative and incremental based approach. And this is a non-tech company. This is a hardware company that manufacture and fabricate these solar-powered water pumping solutions. And they use Scrum for it. I mentioned this earlier in the training. It sounds a little nerdy, but I planned my wedding using Scrum, which is a non-tech project. You know, we did weekly sprints. At the end of the sprint on a Sunday night, my product owner was my wife, my fiance at the time, I guess. If the wedding invitations were due, then a potentially releasable version of that wedding invitation was due, which means the envelope has to be ready, the card has to be in that envelope, it has to fit the size, the print has to be glossy, the stamp should be available, I should be able to write the address and ship it. Whether or not the product owner decides to ship it is their call, but at least the work is done. That would be another example. A couple of years ago, I spent a little time with 2 elementary schools in Goochland County in Richmond, Virginia, to help the teaching faculty build Boy Scout programs using Scrum. So that would be another example of that. So there are plenty of examples that you can think of where Scrum is being used to build complex products. It really depends on the problem domain. So if the problem domain is complex in nature, which means there's a lot of uncertainty, the problem statement is not defined to the most atomic possible level. It's a little vague, and there's room for experimentation. And with experimentation, you get data that you can look at and adjust in the future. I think if that's the dynamic of the domain you're living in, then you can use an empirical process framework like Scrum to solve for that.
Sure. Just a quick statement, just to keep it relevant to the industry, I guess. Basically, again, most of the companies are changing, right? Transforming into the agile ways of things. I mean, it's not like they don't want to lay off people, right? They're transforming the way they're working. And there are jobs, there are requirements, there are people looking for opportunities out there. I think it's just, again, like Aakash said, it's just change of the mindset and the role that you want to play into this agile. Like so many companies out here, I can name like State Farm right now going through a major transition, MoneyGram. All the companies, right? The world of work is changing. Right? It has changed in some cases. Right? Any other questions?
How does the budgets work, or in the ideal Scrum world, or the companies that follow pure Scrum, how does the budgeting of the product development goals? Because I have seen companies where there is a fixed project budget, it's something called project budget, but they still try to do the effort in agile, which means you keep grooming the backlog. And obviously, it's going to be hard to stick to a timeline when you don't know exactly what the scope. I mean, how would you see in those companies that follow the pure Scrum Agile? I mean, have you seen any specific process for the budgeting that would match the Agile? I mean, that would fit into the Scrum work.
Want me to take that? Sure. So I'll give my 2 cents and then I'll let you add on if you want. Obviously, it's a pretty loaded question. It'll take at least a few hours for me to go over the basics of financial planning, but some of the things that stand out from a basic standpoint is when you think of budgeting, a fixed budget is fine, but a fixed budget and a fixed scope, that's not okay. Right? So if you look at the iron triangle of project management, the 3 things that should have been treated as variables but used to be treated as constant, scope, cost, and time. Any one of those being fixed is all right, because you have wiggle room with the other 2, which means you have a flexible approach, an agile approach. If more than one is fixed, it makes it a little difficult, because now 2 of those 3 are fixed, so then you don't have really a lot of wiggle room. So having fixed scope is fine. Having fixed budget is fine. Having fixed time is fine. Having more than one of those fixed at a given time, that's not okay. So when I teach financial planning to clients, one of the things I focus on is how to disassociate the product roadmap or the product backlog from the funding, which means you should pivot away from a functionality dollar conversation and move towards a capacity dollar conversation. So you're funding capacity, you're not funding functionality, because functionality will progressively elaborate as you go through the project. However, capacity is something you can harness and you can build and empower over a period of time. So you want to fund capacity, you don't want to fund functionality. You have to disassociate functionality from capacity and the funding, and then you have to put the onus on product ownership, which means, hey, now you figure out how much of depth you need in this product backlog, because we're going to tell you for $500,000 for funding a 10-member team for 2 weeks, it takes about $100,000. So if you have $500,000, we can fund it for 5 2-week windows, which is like what 5 sprints, I guess, if you're doing a 2-week sprint. So I have the money, $500,000 to spend for 5 sprints, but I don't know how much value I'll get from it. So now the onus is on the product ownership to figure out that. These are some basic principles that we can talk about. Now there are some nuances that go inside, out-of-pocket costs and things like that, but that's something we would look for in a financial planning class.
One last question. Anybody?
See, now we are doing the Scrum Master's certification. So where we can see ourselves in the next 5 years? So what is the career path? Something that's inclined to this Scrum or Scrum Master certification, something like that.
I can tell you about my career path. I'm not going to be audacious enough to tell you where I can see you in 5 years because I know nothing about you. But I get the essence of the question. I would say that a natural progression would be that once you become a Scrum Master, if you decide to work in that field, then you would want to advance in the same field. From a certification standpoint, Scrum Alliance has advanced level certifications. You can look at advanced CSM. If as a certified Scrum Master, if you want to eventually say go into coaching, for example, then there are formal certifications for that also from Scrum Alliance. But in general, there wouldn't be a natural progression from a Scrum Master to a coach or a Scrum Master to a trainer. Some people decide to do that. I started from a technical background, went towards becoming a Scrum Master, and then went into coaching naturally, and then I decided to go into training. That was the path that I took. Everybody doesn't take that path, and that's okay. It's not for everybody. It doesn't make you good or bad. It just makes you unique in whatever you like. But as a Scrum Master, you can continue to be a senior Scrum Master, and you can be a Scrum Master pretty much at any level of the organization. I have seen Scrum Masters at executive levels, where the Scrum Master is like a Chief Data Officer, but they on that team are a Scrum Master, so their designation means nothing. And they're a Scrum Master for a team of 5 people who are all executives and are all developing strategic intent for the company. So all they do is develop strategic intent, but that's their deliverable, that's their increment. So you can be a Scrum Master as an executive, you can be a Scrum Master at team level. It really depends. So the role is pretty transferable across those different hierarchies. It has nothing to do with that. As long as you understand what a Scrum Master does, you can execute that role in pretty much any field you want, whether it's tech or non-tech. Does that make sense?
All right, last question I have. Is Agile or Scrum here to stay, or so companies are implementing like change from waterfall to Agile. Will they come back? Is it, oh, it's not working? Will they come back to the waterfall again?
Yeah, there's a bit of relapse that happens every now and then. But like I said earlier in the class today, that these problems are not going to go away. These problems are going to stay. The problem of solving complex problems, the problem of solving complicated problems. You think about the Kahneman model and things like that. That's not going to go away. So as long as we are living in this problem domain, Agile and Scrum is here to stay, and it's the only logical approach that makes sense. That doesn't mean that Agile or Scrum is the answer to the universe. No, it just means it's a very, very relevant approach, a very relevant way of approaching things in the domain that we live in now. 50 years from now, if we move to a simple domain where cookie cutter approaches things work, maybe waterfall will come back. It depends. So it's not about it's not a reflection on the legitimacy of one approach versus the other. It just depends on the relevance of the way the world operates right now. So in the complex world that we live in today, Scrum is pretty much the most efficient framework of doing things you can think of, or at least I can think of rather. I'm sure domains will change. I'm sure something else will come up in the future.
Okay, I think this is it, right? Thank you, appreciate it.